When we think about religion, we tend to think about it through the lens of a monotheistic perspective, essentially Judeo-Christianity. But if you look back at the Roman Empire, the Greeks, the Egyptians, religion from their perspective as polytheistic faiths was quite different from our principle of one God. When we think of God, we think of this guy who sits up on a big glowing chair, being sort of the judge of the world and the creator of everything. Just one God to rule over all of creation as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And there is an elegance to that concept. But then we think about polytheism. We think about these other religions that existed a long time ago. And we imagine that those people worshipped many gods, and they thought of all of their many gods sort of the same as we think about our God, as rather all-powerful beings that had power over their lives. To some degree, perhaps that's true. But it's also true that in those times, people used gods, deities, as a way to embody, in a visual way, ideas that were rather abstract. So Themis, the goddess of justice, represented by a woman blindfolded holding a scale and a sword, represented the concept of fairness and justice. We still see her adorning modern day courthouses. Athena represented the principle of wisdom and knowledge. Atlas represented strength, holding up the world on his shoulder. There were deities for essentially every virtue imaginable. And the fascinating thing about this is that as time went on, those gods turned into words that we didn't have before those gods existed. The classical deities of Greece actually became the foundation for words that we wouldn't have today without them. The goddess of justice became the word justice. Clotho, the weaver of fate, became the foundation for the modern day word cloth or clothing. The classical interpretation of religion was much more like the way you would explain goodness and happiness through the metaphor of Santa Claus to a child. Because the child can't really understand the abstract idea of moral principle so well, but perhaps he or she can understand the idea of Santa Claus as this loving, kind, fatherly character who is going to reward good behavior. Santa Claus becomes a symbol of love and kindness and all of those Christmas feelings. It's not so important that we believe that Santa Claus actually exists, in the sense that he's really going to come popping down the chimney. And maybe the child does believe that. But we don't cherish Santa Claus as a tradition because we believe he actually is this spirit with magical powers. We cherish Santa Claus as a tradition because of what Santa Claus represents. And it's the same with the classical deities. Athena and Isis and the Valkyrie that would spirit heroes into Valhalla. All of those amazing characters that created pictures of things that are more spiritual than physical. That's awesome. And we do that an injustice, that entire culture an injustice, when we think of polytheism as something that's basically a variant of a monotheistic philosophy. Monotheism, as it is today, is essentially a combination of government principles, because God is presented in the Western world as a divine authority, much like a central government would be. And it is a conceptualization of the generative principle, the idea of that summation force that is the universal principle underlying all things, which is, of course, an important part of philosophy. Generally, God, as we see it in the Western world, is probably best represented by geometry. The concept that all things in the world have a certain structure to them, an underlying order that defines right and wrong, that defines absolute truth. There's a place for both in our pantheon of ideas and thoughts, but I think it's important to take a moment to realize how much we owe the classical world for what it gave us when it created the pantheons of classical deities that we still know and in many cases love to this day. I also think that in the form of fantasy games and stories, we have found a way to revive some of that imagination in a new living way for new generations of people in modern times. And maybe that's why gaming has appealed to me so much. Whether it's great storytelling in a book or a fantasy setting in a video game, creating spaces where we can explore ideas in a way that's safe and a way that's visual, so that we can grasp more clearly those spiritual things that you can't really picture easily. It helps us to think through things, to maybe have a better idea of where we stand and who we are. It's interesting how you could say that imagination doesn't really matter, and yet if all you have is the physical things that you do to create essentially gross domestic product, you go to work, you manage a business, you manage production of something, there's something inherently missing there, if that's all it is. Because at some point, you're going to have to say, well, why does that exist? Why am I working for this purpose? What is the value there? And if the only thing you can say is, well, I'm just doing it because that's what we do, that's not really enough. Like, there has to be a real reason. Like, why are we playing this game? Well, we're doing it because it inspires us, right? And why are we going to work? Why are we doing our usual vocations? Why are we doing any of those things in life? if it's not for the purpose of imagination and being inquisitive and having a sense of passion for something that's more spiritual than physical. It's important for us to be able to ask these questions of why. Why do we exist? What is our purpose spiritually? Not just in terms of productive things that we do. And maybe the only good answer is the one that remains open to interpretation. And that's why I like fantasy so much. Because it doesn't try to say it has to be the only voice in the room. When you talk about religion, when you talk about politics, there's always this underlying narrative that you can't like something because it's good, but not want to give it your full and entire worship. But in fantasy, you can just admire things for what they are. You don't have to worship them to be inspired by them. And things don't have to be rooted purely in reality to have a real impact on our lives and on our minds, on our hearts, and to inspire us on our pathway through life. The world would be a very dull place without imagination. And while it's true that we do need to remain reasonably grounded, we do have to understand that the world does have a certain fundamental order to it. At least the world as we see it certainly does. And we have to play by the rules of the order of the universe as we understand it. We can still imagine things broadly, however we wish to, and there's a certain joy in that. Being able to say that no matter who you are, you can always open up that wardrobe and go off into some unknown place, and maybe there's another world hidden behind the fur coats, if you're a Narnia fan, you know, to see things that don't exist and realize that they can be just as real as the things that everyone says are real. Your imagination can be a real contributor to your quality of life. But I think the best way to do that is to be open to hearing many different ideas and incorporating all of them, even if they're a little bit conflicting, to just take the best bits and pieces of all of it. Christianity, Eastern religions, left and right politics, classical polytheistic religions, the pantheons of Egypt and Rome and Greece, and the wild stories of Tamriel and Tyria and all of the famous places in fictional MMO universes. All of it can come together and be part of something that makes you believe that there's more to life than just what meets the eye. And when you have that perspective of being ecumenical and open-minded about all these different things, if you also can prune anger and hatred out of your heart along the way, I think that's the solution to having a happy and positive and meaningful life. And I'll close with this thought. Martin Luther King once said that hate is too heavy a burden to bear. And most of us are not dramatically hateful, but most of us do have a certain bit of hate within us. The sort of hate that gets off on just stirring the pot, always jumping into some sort of drama that we don't really need to be part of. I think we'd all probably be a bit better off if we spent more time thinking about fictional things that we could do in a video game, or stories we could get lost in the pages of a book. Things that would inspire and tell people tales of hope. If we were more interested in those things and a bit less interested in things like who's going to win the next election, or what's going on in some sort of a global conflict somewhere in the world, if we just let go of some of those things and we stop trying to prove that we're better than other people, and we stop trying to prove that we were arbiters of truth in some extraordinary way, and we stop trying to figure out how we could have a legacy that's super important or something, and we just enjoyed our lives exactly as they are, you know, that'd be good, right? You know, it's like we want our lives to have meaning, and so we become so determined to find a specific way to do that everything gets twisted into some sort of a competition for completion, that we have to be able to say that we found that ultimate answer. We have this secret figured out. We know what you need to believe. We know what you need to do. We have to finish the game, master the religion, win the political debate. We can't just be. And you say, well, you know, life does matter. Like, you can't just have your head in the clouds all the time, right? And that's fair. But you know what? We do have to do things in our lives. We have to do things to earn our way in life, to pay the bills, to fulfill our obligations to society. These are things we have to do anyway. It's just, you don't have to be in spiritual bondage to things. That's all I'm saying. You know, if there is a great state of conflict and war, and we get invaded by hostile, terrible people tomorrow, and they're burning down our homes and destroying the lives of our families, well then, yes, we're going to do something about that. We're going to get up in the morning and we're going to realize that something terrible is happening and we have to do something about it. Of course, we're going to address it. But that's different than being just mired in a lifestyle where you don't have to be focused on all this other stuff. You could just focus on things that inspire you and inspire other people. You don't have to be buried in all of the BS that's flowing around. You don't have to worry about what your neighbors are doing and what your coworkers are doing and what the president is doing. You could just have a childlike sense of imagination and fun, and you could see good in all sorts of things in the world. You could see life truly through the lens of essentially everything is good. Even the things that seem terrible are good in a sense, because there's the yin and the yang, there's the balance, the duality of all things. You can't have a story of goodness if you don't also have the bad guys, if you don't also have the villains, if you don't also have the dark forces that are off in the shadows. So maybe we just need to think about how our lives should be filled with symbols of inspiration. And we shouldn't focus so much on making sure that those are the right symbols, making sure that those are the right things, making sure that we've achieved something specific. Maybe we should just be happy with who we are today and accept that this path that we're on, the path that we have taken, the path we are taking, is the right path for us. And the path that others are taking is the right path for them too. And however we choose to see spirituality in our lives or in the lives of others, we should see it a bit more like a game. You know, if I like a certain game, I'm not going to be infuriated if you like a different one. And maybe I take my game a bit more seriously than yours because I don't play your game. But that doesn't mean I don't think that you should enjoy your experience. To the contrary, my experiences are made better by knowing that other people are having and discovering journeys of their own. As you embark on your journey, I wish you the very best always. Till next time, thank you for watching.